The rain had a sound out here, a different one from the city. It wasn't the anonymous hiss on pavement, but a deep, drumming heartbeat against the old tin roof of the library, each drop a tiny fist against the glass of the tall, arched windows. I'd been watching it for an hour, watching the sky turn from bruised purple to a heavy, uniform gray. The lights inside flickered once, twice, making the warm yellow glow of the reading lamps feel fragile, temporary. My own world felt that way most days. My life in Bridgers Hollow was a construct of careful, quiet routines. I worked my 20 hours a week here, shelving books and managing the town's ancient database. The rest of the time, I sat in my small apartment above the general store, chasing freelance design work that paid just enough to cover rent and groceries, with nothing left over for ambition. It was a life built on the principle of not sinking, which felt very different from swimming. I'd come here to escape the wreckage of a failed business and an even more failed relationship in a city that had chewed me up and spat me out, leaving me with little more than a pile of debt and a deep-seated fear of taking another risk. And then there was Julian Vance. He was another one of my routines, in a way. He came into the library every other Friday, regular as the town clock. He'd return a neat stack of books, history, biographies, the occasional dense volume on agricultural science, and select a new one. He never browsed for long. He seemed to know exactly what he wanted. He was a man who moved with a quiet economy, no wasted steps or words. The owner of the sprawling high meadow ranch that overlooked the entire valley, he was a local legend of sorts, a man whose family had been here for generations. He was wealthy, yes, but it was an old, quiet wealth that showed itself not in flash, but in the solid, well-maintained fences on his property and the quality of his worn leather boots. He was also, to my constant, secret unease, the most compelling man I had ever seen. He was at least 20 years my senior, his dark hair threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, his face etched with fine lines from years of squinting into the sun. But it was the steadiness in his eyes, a calm, assessing gray, that held me captive. He'd look at me when I checked out his books, a look that wasn't invasive but felt thorough, like he was seeing more than just the lanky, 26-year-old librarian with tired eyes. For a few seconds, I wouldn't feel invisible, and that feeling was as terrifying as it was addictive. Today was not a Friday, but the storm had driven people to seek refuge in the driest, most solid building in the low-lying part of town, the library. And just as the wind began to howl in earnest, rattling the window frames in their 100-year-old sashes, he walked in. He wasn't carrying any books. He was wearing a heavy, waxed canvas jacket, beaded with rain, and his expression was grim. "Martha," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise of the storm. He addressed Martha, the head librarian, but his eyes swept the room, cataloging the handful of us stranded here. They landed on me for a moment, and I felt the familiar jolt, a warmth that had nothing to do with the library's struggling furnace. "Julian," Martha breathed, her hand going to her chest. "This is a bad one. It's getting worse," he confirmed. "The sheriff just put out the call. They're closing the bridge. The creek's already cresting its banks. Anyone who lives on the lower road needs to get to higher ground. The school gym is the designated shelter," a cold knot formed in my stomach. The lower road. That was me. My apartment, with my laptop and my entire meager life inside it, was directly in the path of the rising water. The image of muddy creek water seeping through the floorboards, ruining the few things I owned, made my breath catch. Julian's gaze found me again, and this time it held. He saw the panic I was trying to hide. I was sure of it. His brow furrowed slightly. I looked away, focusing on a water stain on the ceiling, pretending I was just another concerned citizen and not a man whose entire world was about to be washed away. He spoke with Martha for another minute, his voice too low for me to hear the words, but the tone was one of calm authority, of a man used to taking charge. People started to gather their things, a nervous energy filling the quiet space. I stood frozen, my mind racing. The school gym. Cold floors, cots, the smell of damp wool, and fear. I had $27 in my bank account until my next freelance payment cleared. I had nowhere else to go. I must have looked as lost as I felt, because when I risked a glance back at him, he was walking toward me. He stopped a few feet away, creating a small pocket of stillness in the growing chaos. "Leo," he said. My name on his lips sounded solid. Real. Your apartment is over the store, isn't it? I could only nod, my throat tight. He looked out the window at the sheets of rain, then back at me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were kind. That's not a safe place to be tonight. The gym, it's functional, but it's not comfortable, he paused, and the air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken possibilities. I have more than enough room up at the ranch. A warm bed, a hot meal. You'd be safe there, the offer hung in the air. It was a lifeline. It was also, in my damaged, cynical mind, a complication of 1,000 different kinds. A man like him, offering charity to a man like me. The power imbalance was a chasm between us. But then I looked into his steady gray eyes and saw no pity. I saw only a practical solution, offered quietly and without expectation. I am here, now, in his house. The thought is so overwhelming that it feels like a dream. The storm that trapped me is a living thing outside these walls, a furious beast of wind and water. But in here, there is only the sound of a crackling fire and the steady tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. The drive up to the ranch had been terrifying. Julian's truck, a heavy-duty machine that felt more like a tank, cut through the rising water on the roads with a confidence I did not share. I sat in the passenger seat, silent, my hands clenched in my lap, watching the wipers fight a losing battle against the deluge. He didn't press me for conversation. He just drove, his large, capable hands sure on the wheel, his focus absolute. It was the first time I had felt safe all day. His house wasn't a mansion, not in the way I'd imagined. It was a long, low-slung ranch house made of dark wood and river stone, built to withstand a century of storms just like this one. It sat nestled against the side of a hill, sheltered by a stand of ancient pine trees. It looked less like a statement of wealth and more like a part of the landscape itself, a place of permanence and strength. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and something else, something clean and subtle that I decided was just the scent of Julian himself. He led me into a large living room dominated by a stone fireplace, where a fire was already blazing. The furniture was solid, comfortable, leather armchairs, a sturdy oak coffee table, shelves filled not with decorative objects, but with more books, their spines worn and familiar. It was a room meant to be lived in, not just looked at. "Give me your jacket," he said, his voice gentle. "You're soaked through." I let him help me out of my thin, drenched coat. He took it without a word and hung it on a peg by the hearth. The simple, domestic act felt shockingly intimate. He was taller than I'd realized, and standing so close, I could feel the warmth radiating from him, a dry, steady heat that contrasted with the damp chill clinging to my own skin. "I'll find you some dry clothes. The guest room is this way." I followed him down a wide hallway, my worn sneakers squeaking on the polished wood floors. The house was quiet, the sounds of the storm muffled by the thick walls. He opened a door and flicked on a light. The guest room was simple, immaculate. A queen-sized bed with a thick quilt, a wooden dresser, a single armchair by a window that looked out into the black, rain-lashed night. He went to a closet and pulled out a pair of gray sweatpants and a dark green flannel shirt. "These should fit, more or less," he said, laying them on the bed. "The bathroom is through that door. Take a hot shower. Warm yourself up. There's no rush." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "I'll make us some coffee. Or tea. If you prefer, coffee is fine," I managed to say. "Thank you. For all of this," he gave a small nod, his eyes lingering on my face for a second too long. "Everyone needs a safe harbor in a storm. Leo." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone in the overwhelming quiet. The flannel shirt was impossibly soft against my skin. It was too big, the sleeves hanging past my wrists, the shoulders broad. It smelled faintly of him, that same clean, cedar-like scent. I felt swallowed by it, wrapped in a warmth that went deeper than the fabric. I stood in the middle of the room, listening to the storm, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. I was a stranger in this man's house, wearing his clothes, about to drink his coffee. The debt of gratitude I owed him felt immense, a weight I didn't know how to carry. When I returned to the living room, he was sitting in one of the leather armchairs, staring into the fire. A mug of steaming coffee sat on the table beside him, and another was waiting for me. He looked up as I entered, and his gaze traveled over me, taking in the sight of me in his clothes. A flicker of something I couldn't name passed through his eyes before his expression settled back into its usual calm neutrality. Better? He asked. Much. Thank you. I picked up the mug. It was heavy, ceramic, and warm between my palms. I sat in the other armchair, a respectable distance away, and took a sip. The coffee was black, strong, and hot. It was perfect. We sat in silence for a long time, a silence that should have been awkward but wasn't. It was a companionable quiet, filled by the crackle of the fire and the distant roar of the wind. I found myself watching him. I watched the way the firelight carved shadows and highlights onto the rugged planes of his face. I watched his long fingers wrapped around his own mug, the quiet strength in his hands. He didn't fidget. He just sat, perfectly at ease in his own skin, in his own home. He was a man who was utterly grounded, a rock against which the storm could break itself. And I was just adrift. "Are you worried about your apartment?" he asked, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. "Yes," I admitted. "There isn't much in it, but it's all I have, most of the time. The water doesn't get past the first step of the general store," he said, his tone reassuring. "Jed, the owner, keeps sandbags handy. Your place will probably be fine." He said it with such certainty that I almost believed him. He had a way of speaking that made you feel like he had considered all the angles and found the most logical, least alarming conclusion. "I hope so." He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes on the flames. "You're from the city." Originally, it wasn't a question. "Yes, a long way from here." I didn't offer any more. I didn't want to talk about the failure and humiliation that had driven me to this tiny town in the middle of nowhere. He didn't push. He just nodded, accepting my reticence. "It's a different pace of life," was all he said. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10. The sound was deep, resonant, marking the passage of time in this house that felt like it existed outside of it. I was tired, an exhaustion that went bone deep, born of months of stress and the acute anxiety of the last few hours. Julian seemed to sense it. He stood up, placing his empty mug on the mantelpiece. "You should get some sleep. The storm is supposed to be at its worst around 2 in the morning. It's better to be resting." I stood as well, feeling awkward and oversized in his clothes. "Right. Yes. Thank you again, Julian. I don't know what I would have done. You would have gone to the gym and been cold and miserable," he said with a hint of a smile, the first I'd ever seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the stern lines around his mouth. This was a better solution. He walked with me to the guest room door. "The bathroom is stocked with everything you might need. If you need anything else, my room is at the end of the hall. Don't hesitate, I won't. Good night." "Good night, Leo." He held my gaze for a moment, his expression serious again. And in that look, I felt that same sense of being truly seen. It wasn't a look of desire, not yet. It was something quieter, a look of recognition, of care. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor, leaving me to face a night in a strange bed, in a stranger's house, with a storm of my own brewing inside me. I didn't sleep well. The bed was comfortable, the quilt heavy and warm, but my mind wouldn't shut down. Every creak of the house, every roar of the wind, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I was hyper-aware of Julian, just down the hall. A man I barely knew. A man who represented a kind of solid, masculine presence I had secretly yearned for my entire life, was sleeping a few dozen feet away. I lay there, tracing the patterns on the ceiling in the dark, feeling the soft flannel of his shirt against my skin, and wondered what on earth I was doing here. Sometime after midnight, a massive gust of wind slammed into the house, followed by a sickening crack and a heavy thud that seemed to shake the very foundations. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding. It sounded like something huge had fallen nearby. Before I could even think to move, my door opened a crack. "Leo." Julian's voice was a low whisper in the dark. "You okay?" "Yes." "What was that?" Sounded like one of the old pines by the barn finally gave up. "I'm going to check." "Stay here." The door clicked shut. But I couldn't stay there. The thought of him going out into that maelstrom alone was unbearable. I swung my legs out of bed, pulled on the sweatpants, and fumbled for the door. I found him in the entryway, shrugging into his heavy coat and pulling on his boots. He had a powerful flashlight in his hand. He looked up and saw me. "I told you to stay put." There was no anger in his voice, only a firm note of command that I found myself wanting to obey. "You shouldn't go out there alone," I said, my voice sounding thin. He gave me a long, considering look. I've handled worse storms than this by myself. But I'd be a liar if I said I wouldn't appreciate an extra pair of hands to hold the light. He gestured to a hook by the door. There's another coat there. And boots in the closet. If you're coming, be quick. The coat was as big as the first, and the boots were a size too large, but they were warm and dry. Outfitted like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes, I followed him out into the night. The force of the wind nearly knocked me off my feet. It was a physical assault, stealing the air from my lungs and driving the icy rain into my face like needles. The world was a churning chaos of blackness and noise. Julian's flashlight cut a single, steady beam through the turmoil. He put a hand on my back to steady me, a brief, solid pressure that sent a shock of warmth through the thick coat. Stay close, he shouted over the wind. The massive pine tree had fallen exactly where he'd guessed. It had crashed across the main gate to the horse pasture, splintering the heavy wooden beams. A few of the horses, spooked by the noise, were huddled at the far end of the field, their shapes ghostly in the intermittent flashes of lightning. Damn it, Julian muttered, playing the beam over the damage. The gate's ruined. But at least it didn't hit the barn. And the horses are safe. He handed me the flashlight. Keep this steady for me. I need to see if I can clear enough of this to rig a temporary barrier. I don't want them getting out onto the road if the rest of the fence line is down. I did as I was told, planting my feet and holding the beam as steady as I could while the wind tried to tear it from my grasp. I watched him work. He moved with an incredible efficiency, his body strong and sure. He pulled at the smaller branches, snapping them and tossing them aside. He assessed the main trunk, a colossal thing, and quickly determined it was too heavy to move. Instead, he found a length of heavy chain in the barn and began rigging it between the two unbroken gateposts, creating a makeshift barrier behind the wreckage of the tree. He was completely focused, his face set in lines of concentration. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead and dripped from his chin. In the stark, dramatic light of the flashlight, he looked like something elemental, a man as wild and strong as the storm he was fighting. And in that moment, my quiet, distant admiration for him coalesced into something sharper, something more dangerous. A deep, aching want. He finished his work and came back to stand beside me, breathing heavily. That will have to do until morning. He took the flashlight back from me, and his fingers brushed against mine. It was the slightest of touches, skin against skin for less than a second, but it felt like a brand. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. His eyes found mine in the dark. The beam of the light was pointed at the ground, casting us both in a dim, reflected glow. I couldn't read his expression. Let's get back inside, he said, his voice rough. You're shivering? I hadn't even noticed. My whole body was trembling, but I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the jolt of that accidental touch. He put his hand on my back again as we walked, guiding me, and this time he didn't remove it until we were safely inside the mudroom, dripping all over the stone floor. Back in the warmth of the house, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. We shed our wet gear in silence. The atmosphere between us had shifted. The comfortable quiet was gone, replaced by a tense, humming awareness. We had shared something out there, a small battle against the elements, and it had changed the space between us. Julian ran a hand through his wet hair, looking at me. I shouldn't have let you come out, I'm fine, I said, though my teeth were chattering. You're freezing. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a thick towel, which he draped over my shoulders. Then he went to a cabinet in the living room and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a pair of small, heavy glasses. He handed one to me. Whiskey. Drink it. It'll warm you from the inside out. I took a sip. The whiskey was smooth and fiery, and it did exactly what he said it would. It spread a slow, creeping warmth through my chest. We stood by the dying embers of the fire, the only light in the room. You were good out there, he said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost a murmur. You didn't panic. You just did what needed to be done. I just held a flashlight. You held it steady, he corrected. In a gale. That's more than some people can do. He took a drink from his glass, his eyes never leaving mine. Thank you, Leo. The sincerity in his voice made my throat ache. No one had thanked me for being steady in a very long time. I had been the one needing help, the one who was a burden, the one who failed. To be seen as capable, as helpful, by this man, it meant more than he could possibly know. You're welcome, I whispered. He took a step closer. The space between us shrank until I could feel the heat from his body, smell the rain and the whiskey on him. The air grew thick, heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic, panicked bird in my chest. This is it, I thought. This is the moment where something happens. He lifted a hand, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch my face. But instead, his fingers went to the collar of the flannel shirt I was wearing, the one that belonged to him. He gently turned up the collar, his knuckles brushing against the skin of my neck. The touch was feather-light, but it lit a fire that raced down my spine. "You should get back to bed," he said, his voice husky. "Get some real rest." He stepped back, breaking the spell. The moment was over. He had created the space, and then he had closed it, a quiet, deliberate retreat. He was giving me an out. He was being a gentleman, and I was both immensely grateful and crushingly disappointed. "Yes," I agreed, my voice unsteady. "Good night, Julian." I fled back to the guest room, my mind reeling. That touch, it hadn't been accidental. It was a question, a test, and his retreat was a statement. He was leaving the next move, if there was to be one, up to me. The power, which I had felt was so completely his, had just been handed, in some small, terrifying measure, back to me, and I had no idea what to do with it. The next morning, the storm had broken. A watery, pale sunlight filtered through the clouds, illuminating a world that looked battered but cleansed. The wind had died down to a brisk breeze, and the only sound was the dripping of water from the eaves. I woke up feeling groggy, disoriented, the events of the night feeling like a fever dream. I found Julian in the kitchen. It was a large, functional space with a massive wooden island in the center. He was standing at the stove, a spatula in his hand, his back to me. He was wearing a fresh pair of jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. The scene was so intensely domestic it made my chest ache. He must have heard me, because he turned. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but he gave me a small, genuine smile. "Morning. Sleep any better?" "A little," I lied. "It looks calm out there. The worst is over," he confirmed, turning back to the stove. "The creek's already starting to recede. The bridge will probably be closed for another day while they check it for damage, but the immediate danger has passed." He gestured with the spatula toward a stool at the island. "Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." I sat, feeling like an intruder in his morning routine. I watched him move around the kitchen with an easy, practiced grace. He cracked eggs into the pan, flipped the bacon, took 2 plates from a cupboard. He did everything with that same quiet competence he applied to everything else. He set a plate in front of me, 2 eggs, bacon, a piece of thick-cut toast. It was a simple meal, but it felt like a feast. "I hope you're hungry," he said. We ate in a comfortable silence that felt different from the night before. The tension was gone, replaced by a kind of gentle, morning-after calm. I kept stealing glances at him, at the way his brow furrowed when he was concentrating on buttering his toast, the way the morning light caught the silver in his hair. "I need to check on my apartment," I said finally, the worry resurfacing. "As soon as the road is clear, of course," he said, not looking up from his plate. "I'll drive you down as soon as we hear anything. In the meantime," he paused, then finally met my eyes. His gaze was direct, serious. "I want to be clear about something, Leo. You are my guest. You are here because it was the safe, sensible thing to do. There are no strings attached to that. I don't want you to ever feel obligated." There it was. He was addressing the elephant in the room, the unspoken power dynamic, the age gap, the wealth disparity. He was naming it, and in doing so, he was trying to defuse it. He was trying to protect me, even from himself. "I don't," I said, and it was mostly true. What I felt was an obligation. It was a confusing, overwhelming mix of gratitude and attraction. He seemed to accept that, for now. "Good." He finished his breakfast and stood to clear the plates. "I have some work to do." The storm knocked down a section of fence on the north pasture. "You're welcome to stay here, read, relax. Make yourself at home. The library is through there," he said, gesturing with his chin. "I'm sure you'll find something to your liking." He was creating distance again, giving me space. Part of me was relieved. The intensity of the night before had left me feeling raw and exposed. But another, larger part of me felt a pang of disappointment. I didn't want space. I wanted to be near him. I spent the next few hours in his library. It was my favorite room in the house, a sanctuary of wood and paper. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with books on every conceivable subject. It was the collection of a man with a curious and wide-ranging mind. I ran my fingers over the spines, feeling a sense of connection to him through the things he chose to read. But I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to him, out there, fixing a fence by himself. I imagined his strong hands working with the wire, the strain in his shoulders as he lifted a heavy post. I felt useless, sitting inside while he worked. Around noon, there was a knock at the front door. I heard Julian's heavy boots in the hall, the sound of the door opening, and then another voice, a woman's, sharp and curious. "Julian, thank heavens you're all right. That storm was a monster. I saw the tree down by your gate. Do you need a hand?" "I'm fine, Carol." Julian's voice was polite but cool. "I've already stabilized it. Well, I was just checking on everyone. Lord, the whole town is a mess. The bridge is out, of course. People are stranded all over. You didn't happen to see young Leo from the library, did you? His car is still in the lot, and Martha was worried sick about him. His apartment is right in the flood zone." There was a beat of silence. I held my breath, standing frozen just inside the library doorway. "He's here," Julian said, his voice perfectly even. "I ran into him at the library just before they closed the bridge. Brought him up here where it was safe." "Oh." Carol's voice was laced with a new, speculative tone. "Well, isn't that neighborly of you? The poor boy. He's so quiet. Keeps to himself. It's good he had someone looking out for him." The unspoken assumptions in her words were as loud as a shout. "It was the decent thing to do," Julian said, his voice hardening slightly, cutting off any further gossip. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a fence to mend before my horses decide to take a tour of the town, of course. Well, you tell him we were all asking after him." The door closed, and the house was silent again. I leaned against the doorframe, my face hot with shame. I was the subject of town gossip. The poor boy taken in by the wealthy rancher. The dynamic I feared, the one Julian had tried so carefully to dismantle, had just been laid bare by a nosy neighbor. Julian appeared in the hallway. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You heard that?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Don't pay any attention to Carol," he said, his voice low. "She means well, but her tongue runs ahead of her brain. She said what everyone will be thinking." I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That I'm some charity case. A stray you took in." He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He stopped right in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. His gray eyes were intense, fierce. "I don't give a damn what anyone in this town thinks. Do you understand me?" His hands came up to grip my shoulders, his hold firm, grounding. "The only thing that matters is that you are safe. Nothing else." His protective anger on my behalf was a revelation. It wasn't pity. It was a raw, unfiltered defense of my dignity. He was shielding me, standing between me and the judgment of the world. And the feel of his hands on me, the heat of his body so close, the intensity in his eyes, it shattered the last of my restraint. This is it. This is the moment. My mind goes quiet, all the frantic calculations and fears falling away. There is only him, standing before me, his hands a warm, solid weight on my shoulders. The air is thick with the unspoken, with everything that has been building since I first stepped into his truck. "What I think," I say, my voice trembling but clear, "is that you are the kindest man I have ever met." The words are inadequate. They are a tiny cup trying to hold an ocean of feeling. And I don't feel like a charity case. I feel. I trail off, unable to articulate the storm of emotions inside me. His grip on my shoulders gentles, his thumbs stroking the tense muscle there. "You feel what, Leo?" he asks, his voice a low caress. It's not a demand. It's an invitation. An open door. I take a breath. I feel seen. And I haven't felt that in a very long time. The confession hangs in the air, vulnerable and honest. And it's more than just gratitude, Julian. I have to tell you that. It's more a flicker of something. Relief, understanding, a deep and profound tenderness softens his rugged features. He searched my face, his gray eyes looking for any hint of doubt, any shadow of coercion. He finds none. He only finds the raw, unvarnished truth of my yearning. "I know," he says, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tries to hide. "For me, too." And then he leans in. It's a slow, deliberate movement, giving me every possible chance to turn away, to retreat. I don't. I can't. I meet him halfway, rising on my toes slightly, closing the last inch of space between us. His lips are firm, warm, and gentle. It is not a kiss of frantic passion, but of deep, soul-shaking rightness. It's a kiss that says, finally. It's a confirmation of everything that has passed between us in glances, in small touches, in shared silence. It tastes of coffee and rain and a loneliness I recognize as my own. He pulls back just enough to rest his forehead against mine. His eyes are closed. I can feel his breath, warm and steady, on my lips. My hands, of their own accord, have come up to rest on his chest, over the solid, reassuring beat of his heart. I can feel the strength of him, the sheer reality of him, and I am not afraid. Leo, he breathes, my name a prayer against my skin. He kisses me again, and this time there is more pressure, a deeper searching. His hand moves from my shoulder to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to him. I open my mouth to him, a silent offering, and the kiss deepens into something more. It is a slow, unhurried exploration, a conversation without words. There is no power imbalance here, no giver and taker. There is only a profound and startling equality. We are two men, finding a harbor in each other. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. He keeps his forehead pressed to mine, his eyes still closed, as if he's memorizing the feeling of this moment. I watch the play of emotions on his face, the relief, the wonder, the quiet joy. I was so afraid, he whispers, the admission costing him. Afraid of this, of wanting this, afraid of being too much, too old, that you would see me as just some man taking advantage of a situation. Never. I say, my voice fierce with conviction. I have never felt more respected, more safe. I lace my fingers with his, my smaller hand almost lost in his warm, calloused grip. This feels right, yes, he agrees, a slow smile spreading across his face, the one that softens all his hard edges. It really, really does. He leads me by the hand from the hallway into the living room, to the big leather armchair by the window. He sits and pulls me down to sit on his lap. The gesture should feel possessive, but it doesn't. It feels protective, cherishing. I settle against his chest, my head resting in the hollow of his shoulder, and he wraps his arms around me, holding me securely. We sit there for a long time, watching the last of the storm clouds drift away, revealing a patch of brilliant blue sky. The world outside is still and quiet. The battle is over. And in the warm, safe circle of his arms, I feel like my own long storm has finally passed. I am home. The morning light was different, softer. I woke slowly, tangled in warm sheets that smelled of him. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar weight of a heavy arm draped over my waist a startling comfort. Then it all came rushing back. The confession, the kiss, the hours we'd spent talking by the fire, our voices low, sharing pieces of our pasts like carefully guarded treasures. I had ended up in his bed, not in a rush of passion, but as a natural, inevitable conclusion to the evening. We had simply held each other, falling asleep to the steady rhythm of each other's breathing. I turned my head on the pillow. Julian was still asleep, his face relaxed, peaceful. In sleep, he looked younger, the stern lines of responsibility erased. A lock of silver-streaked hair had fallen across his forehead. I had the strongest urge to reach out and brush it back, but I didn't want to wake him. I just lay there, watching him, memorizing the shape of his mouth, the steady rise and fall of his chest. But even in the warmth of the bed, a familiar chill began to creep in at the edges of my contentment. The cold light of day brought with it the cold, hard questions. What now? This house, this man, this feeling of safety, it was all a bubble created by a storm. But the storm was over. The real world, with its gossip and its complications and its power imbalances, was waiting just down the hill. I was a man with $27 to his name, sleeping in the bed of a wealthy rancher who had, out of kindness, saved me from a flood. The optics were terrible. The reality was confusing. Was this real? Or was it just a moment of shared loneliness, a temporary comfort that would evaporate with the morning mist? The old anxieties, the ones that whispered to me that I was unworthy, that I was a burden, began to stir. Quietly, I slipped out of bed. I found my borrowed clothes from the day before, still folded neatly on the chair. I dressed in the half-light, feeling the need to put my own inadequate armor back on. I crept out of the bedroom and went to the kitchen to make coffee, needing a simple, normal task to ground me. The kitchen was filled with pale, golden light. I found the coffee beans, the grinder, the machine. The familiar ritual of it calmed me. As the coffee brewed, filling the quiet house with its rich aroma, I stood at the large window over the sink, looking out at the valley. The world looked clean, scrubbed new by the rain. In the distance, I could see the glint of the creek, back within its banks. Life was returning to normal. I was wondering where you'd gone. Julian's voice made me jump. I turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, wearing only a pair of jeans, his chest bare. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It was guarded. I was just making coffee, I said, my voice too bright. He walked over to me, his movements slow, deliberate. He stopped in front of me, his eyes searching my face. He knew. He could sense my retreat, the wall I was already starting to build. Leo, he said, his voice quiet. Talk to me. What's wrong? I looked away, back out the window. Nothing. I don't know. It's morning. The storm is over, and, he prompted gently. And I have to figure out what to do next, I said, the words tumbling out. I have to go back to my apartment, see if it's damaged. I have to get back to work. I have to get back to my life. Is that what you want? He asked. The question was simple, but it carried an immense weight. I finally met his eyes. I don't know what I want. Last night was perfect. It felt separate from everything. Safe. But now it's today, and I'm still me, and you're still you. Nothing has actually changed. I disagree, he said, his voice firm. Everything has changed. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers wrapping around mine. A warm, solid anchor. I understand your fear. I do. You're a proud, independent man, and the circumstances of how we came together are complicated. But what happened between us was not a product of the storm. It was a product of me seeing you, day after day, in the library, and wanting to know the quiet man with the sad eyes. The storm just provided the opportunity. His honesty was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I don't want this to be a temporary thing, Leo, he continued, his gaze unwavering. But I also don't want you to feel trapped or dependent. Your independence is part of who you are. It's one of the things I admire about you. He let go of my hand and poured 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me. So, we make a plan. A practical 1-inch. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. First, as soon as the bridge is open, we'll go down and check on your apartment. We'll deal with whatever we find, together. Second, I have a proposition for you. A job, if you want it. I stared at him, my anxiety immediately spiking. A job. Charity dressed up as employment. He must have seen the fear in my eyes, because he held up a hand. Hear me out. This is not a handout. It's a real project I've been putting off for years. My grandfather was a passionate amateur botanist. His journals, hundreds of them, are stored in the attic. They're a complete record of the flora in this valley, going back almost a century. They're historically significant, but they're disorganized, and they're deteriorating. I want to have them professionally archived and digitized. It requires someone with an eye for detail, patience, and skill with design and layout. Someone like you. He named a salary that made my head spin. It was more than fair, it was generous. It's a contract position, he continued. Clear deliverables, a set timeline. You could work from here, or from your own apartment. It would be entirely separate from us. It would give you financial stability, on your own terms, earned with your own skills. It would give you a reason to be here that has nothing to do with me personally. He had thought it all through. He had anticipated my fears and found a solution that preserved my dignity, that gave me agency. He wasn't trying to buy me or own me. He was trying to build a bridge, a way for our 2 very different worlds to meet on equal footing. And us? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Us, he said, a soft smile touching his lips. We take that slow. We get to know each other without the pressure of a storm trapping us under one roof. We go on a proper date. I'll even come to your tiny apartment and let you cook me a terrible meal. If that's what it takes to make things feel balanced. His gentle humor broke through the last of my fear. A laugh, watery and full of relief, escaped me. My cooking isn't that bad. I'll be the judge of that, he teased. He stepped forward and gently tucked a stray piece of my hair behind my ear. His touch was light, respectful. The choice is yours, Leo. The job. Us. All of it. No pressure. You can walk away right now, and I will still drive you home and make sure you're okay. Nothing that happened last night was transactional. I looked into his eyes, and I saw my future. It wasn't a future of dependency, but one of partnership, of being cared for, yes, but also of being in a position to care for him in return. He wasn't offering me a cage, however gilded. He was offering me a foundation, a steady place to stand so I could finally learn to build something of my own. I'll take the job, I said, my voice firm. Good, he said, his relief palpable. And I'd like to take you up on that date, too. His smile widened, reaching his eyes, making them crinkle at the corners. Even better, later that afternoon, we got the call. The bridge was open. The test had arrived. The path back to my old life was clear. We drove down in his truck, the same one that had rescued me. The town was a mess of mud and debris, but people were already out, helping each other clean up. There was a sense of community, of shared resilience, that I had never really felt a part of until now. My apartment was fine. Just as Julian had predicted, the water had stopped at the first step. It was damp and smelled of mud, but nothing was damaged. I stood in the middle of the small, cramped room that represented my entire life, and it felt foreign. Small. After the solid, quiet expanse of Julian's house, this place felt like a cage. Julian stood in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. It looks okay, he said. It is, I said. I turned to face him. He was waiting, his expression patient, letting me make the choice. He wouldn't ask. He wouldn't pressure me. He would let me decide. And the decision was the easiest one I had ever made. I just need to pack a bag, I said. With some more of my own clothes this time, the relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. He gave me a single, decisive nod. I'll wait in the truck. I packed quickly, a sense of purpose humming through me. I was not a refugee anymore. I was a man walking toward his future, not running from his past. As I closed the door to my old life, I felt a click, not of something ending, but of something finally, truly beginning. We didn't talk much on the drive back up the winding road to the ranch. We didn't need to. A new kind of quiet had settled between us, one filled not with uncertainty, but with the peaceful, settled weight of a shared decision. When we pulled up to the house, the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, bathing the valley in a warm, golden light. We stood on his porch for a moment, side by side, looking out at the clean, rain-washed world. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. I need to make one thing clear, I said, turning to him. The job is the job. I'll work hard, and I'll earn my pay. But us, that's separate. I want to be here because of you, not because of a contract. He turned to face me, his expression serious. I would never have offered the one without hoping for the other. He reached out, his hand coming to rest on my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. The gesture was tender, possessive in the best possible way. Welcome home, Leo, home. The word echoed in the quiet space of my heart. It had been so long since I'd had one. I had thought it was a place, a collection of walls and a roof. But I was wrong. I looked up at this steady, kind, honorable man, a man who had seen me at my most lost and offered me not pity, but respect. And I realized home wasn't a place at all. It was a feeling. It was the feeling of being safe. It was the feeling of being seen. It was the feeling of standing next to Julian Vance. We started slowly, just as he had promised. The next few weeks settled into a quiet, domestic rhythm that felt both brand new and deeply familiar. I set up a workspace in his library, surrounded by the scent of old paper and leather. I began the painstaking work of sorting and scanning his grandfather's journals. It was fascinating, meticulous work that engaged my mind and soothed my soul. I was creating order from chaos, a fitting metaphor for my own life. Julian respected the boundaries we had set. During the day, he was a distant, busy presence on the ranch. I would hear his truck rumbling to life in the early morning, and often wouldn't see him again until dusk, when he would come in smelling of hay and horse and the crisp autumn air. He would find me in the library, a smudge of ink on my nose, and he would just stand in the doorway for a moment, watching me, a quiet, contented smile on his face. But in the evenings, the boundaries would soften. He would cook for us, simple, hearty meals we ate at the big kitchen island. We talked for hours. I told him about my failed design firm, the business partner who had betrayed me, the crushing weight of debt and disappointment that had followed. He listened without judgment, his steady gaze making me feel brave. He, in turn, told me about his life, about growing up on this ranch, about his parents, about the wife he had loved and lost to cancer a decade ago. He spoke of his loneliness, not with self-pity, but as a simple fact, a long winter he had endured. This house got too quiet, he told me one night, echoing the sentiment from the night of the storm. I'd gotten used to it. I didn't realize how quiet until you were here, making noise. We went on dates. He drove us into the next town over, to a quiet Italian restaurant where no one knew us. He held my hand across the checkered tablecloth. It felt wonderfully, thrillingly normal. And I kept my promise, cooking for him in my tiny apartment, which I still kept, a symbol of my independence. The meal was, as he had predicted, terrible. I burned the chicken. He ate every bite and declared it the best meal he'd ever had, his eyes crinkling with laughter when I called him a liar. Our physical intimacy grew at the same unhurried pace. It started with a hand on the small of my back as we passed in the hall, a lingering kiss goodnight at my bedroom door. He never pushed, never presumed. He let me set the pace. He made me feel cherished, not just desired. One evening, about a month after the storm, I was working late in the library. I was engrossed in one of the journals, deciphering the elegant, faded script describing a rare orchid found only on the highest ridge of the valley. A log shifted in the fireplace, and I looked up. Julian was standing there, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to me and sat in the leather armchair opposite my desk. Making progress. It's incredible, I said, my voice full of genuine excitement. Your grandfather was a poet as much as a scientist. Listen to this. I read a passage aloud, a beautiful, precise description of the flower. He listened, a soft expression on his face. I'm glad they're in good hands, he said. You've brought them back to life. He looked at me, his gaze deep and serious. You've brought a lot of things back to life around here, Leo. I put the journal down, my heart beating a little faster. The air in the room shifted, growing warmer, thicker. Julian, I started, not sure what I was going to say. He stood up and came around the desk. He took the glass from my hand and set it aside. Then he held out his hand to me. Come with me, he said. It wasn't a command, but a quiet plea. I took his hand, and he led me from the library, down the hall, to his bedroom. He had lit a fire in the fireplace there, and the room was filled with a soft, flickering glow. He didn't say a word. He just turned to me and began to unbutton the flannel shirt I was wearing. Not one of his this time, but my own. His movements were slow, reverent. He undressed me with an aching tenderness, his calloused hands gentle on my skin. And I, in turn, undressed him, my fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt, wanting to feel the solid warmth of his skin against mine. When we stood before each other, bathed in the firelight, all the differences between us, age, wealth, experience, melted away. We were just 2 men, vulnerable and open and full of a profound, desperate need for connection. That night, he made love to me as if he were worshiping me. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word was an act of devotion. He showed me what it felt like to be truly wanted, not for a moment, but for a lifetime. And I gave him everything I had in return, all my broken pieces, all my quiet hopes, all my pent-up yearning. In his arms, I was not fragile. I was whole. Afterward, we lay tangled together, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. My head was on his chest, and I could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart beneath my ear. It was the most peaceful sound in the world. I love you, Leo, he said into the quiet of the room. The words were simple, unadorned, and they landed in my soul with the weight of absolute truth. Tears pricked my eyes. I lifted my head to look at him. His face, in the soft light, was open, vulnerable, waiting. I love you too, I whispered. And as I said the words, I knew I had finally, truly come home. The storm had closed a bridge, but it had opened a door. A door to a man who saw me, a life I never thought I could have, and a quiet foundation of love, built to withstand anything. The differences in our lives were not a cage. They were simply the context for a partnership built on care, on consent, and on the steady, quiet gravity of two souls finally finding their anchor in each other. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.